Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Our first hour is general discussion about media production. And our second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. And today we're going to talk about power. How we manage power in our studios, how we manage it on the road, how do we manage that power? So we're going to talk about that a little bit in the second hour. So if you've got questions about power management, go ahead and throw those into Makana. And if you have other questions, you can throw them into Makana as well. In Makana, you can ask the questions, vote on the questions. We highly recommend voting on the questions so that we understand which ones you want to answer first. But if you're not in Makana, of course, you can use just askofficehours.global. That's askofficehours.global. In fact, you can use that 24/7. Anytime you think of a question, you can just go ahead and throw it in there. So go ahead and save that URL and throw the questions in as needed. And then in the morning, we'll feed those in. All right, let's go ahead and jump into those questions. Bill, what do we have?
First one comes from Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana, and he's got a workflow query. Any design flaws, and here's the workflow: NDI capture into vMix with 3 HDMI encoders, which are linked together, plus a switch built into a case. The laptop would patch into the switch. His school, or the school that he's working with, wants a portable system, and he's got a link there.
Good guy.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, there's a lot of schools in this same situation. The question that I would ask back is, well, why vMix? Why do you want to go with a software switcher? Where are the cameras coming in from? Because the length of the cable starts to matter, and I would just go with an ATEM because by the time that you add in everything, those 3 encoders at $200 a whack, that's $600. You can get a nice ATEM, and you can go SDI, and you can just go really easy troubleshooting. With NDI, those are NDI HX encoders, so there's a little bit of lag. They're not full NDI. So if you want full NDI, you're going to want a Bird Dog, you're going to want a Magewell, and now you're stepping into a lot more money. So, and that latency isn't a big deal, but if you're doing sports, it is a big deal because if you're cutting from one camera to another, you can actually make the ball, like they go to shoot, you cut to the close-up, and the ball comes back. It's like you don't want. I did a show once where that happened around Formula Drift, where the car went around a corner, and you're cutting from the long shot because of the delay. It looked like it was doing it again. So sometimes frames start to matter. So my question is just, why do you want to go NDI? I know if it's a learning thing, then let's look at your workflow, your entire workflow, where the cables are coming from, and if it's for scoring, because what a lot of people will do is they'll take the ATEM, feed it into vMix, and then USB in, and now you've got all your cameras in sync, and you're able to have one lightweight input into vMix, and now you could do your scoring and all your titling and your encoding. So that's a popular workflow. A lot of folks that are in this ATEM group that I'm in do that. They have a nice little case that they pop open with the ATEM, and then they feed it right in. So lots of options. It just depends on what you want to do. And then I'd also be looking at Mimo Live if you're really wanting to go with a software switcher, especially if you already have some existing Macs, Mac Minis, or MacBook Pros that the school may already own.
Next question.
TJ Asher comes up next from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Since I'm unable to get a copper internet backup to my fiber, I need some sort of LTE or 5G type internet backup. Cable is not an option. Recommend wireless internet solutions. He's looking at $50 a month budget, and note he's a few blocks from an AT&T cell tower.
John?
I use the Verizon hotspot as my backup. At home, it works out really well. I have friends of mine who use T-Mobile. Depending on how many people are using T-Mobile in the area, those can be very successful as well. I'm sure AT&T, if you have good bandwidth, if you're able to test it before committing to a long-term contract, any of those would be a great option as a backup. They work perfectly fine for Zoom calls or anything that you're doing, assuming that you just have solid connectivity.
Good. Courtney?
Yeah, look into fixed wireless and 5G, especially if you have 5G in your neighborhood. Look at the wireless coverage maps for AT&T or whatever provider. Check all of them, because although there may be an AT&T cell site near you, there may be others that are even closer. And 5G, I took a look at some of the prices here. Here's one Starry Internet. This is fixed 5G. And their prices go from $15 a month for 30 up and down symmetrical up to $65 for 500. So that's pretty reasonable. And so check with T-Mobile and Verizon, those type. I have a problem because I was looking into this, and so I looked at my Verizon, and here's Hollywood. and you see this little pink thing here. This is the 5G coverage, is this dark red, and you see this little pink island in the middle of all. That's probably where I live.
That's I was going to say that's Courtney's house.
It's like, we ain't giving him 5G.
Is there a curse on you?
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
That's astonishing, Courtney. TJ, when I first moved to the coast here to work, my Comcast went down for like almost a week, and I was like this close to purchasing a Starlink solution. I wanted it. I was actually just looking for a good excuse to buy it. It's obviously more than the $50 a month. But one thing that's interesting, sorry for the coughing. One thing that's interesting is the issue with the fact that when you're in a busier area, kind of like cellular, when you're in a busier area, you don't get as good a speeds on the thing. I talk to Keenan all the time because he's got Starlink permanently attached to his Jeep. And of course, he's out in the desert and stuff. And he's always sending me screen grabs, and I think, wow, that's really impressive for your car. But I use my cell phone on occasion, AT&T, when if I just need to get a couple of things out. I've even done a few Zoom calls over it.
Go ahead, CJ.
The other thing that I'll recommend that I've had a lot of success with, it is a hotspot, but I got this little Netgear hotspot for work. It's a little under $500, but what I like about it is it has an Ethernet on the bottom, so you can hardwire in, and it has a lot of them have this too. It has spots for an external antenna. So if you're looking at something like this, you have an external antenna that you can plug in, and then if you physically aren't next to your window or somewhere where there's signal, you can fish this out, and then you're in good shape.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Andy Kokendorfer in Viera, Florida, and he says, thoughts on the new Aperture Spotlight Max as a LECO replacement, and he's got a link to it there.
Go ahead, Bill.
Looks like a really good instrument. I'll pull it up here. It's in the traditional theatrical LECO or ellipsoidal spotlight form factor. It looks like it has the traditional LECO lens on the front of it at this point. I was surprised at how much power this guy puts out. It's a pretty expensive instrument, $1,000, $1,200, $1,300, somewhere in that zone. But it looks like for the kind of job that these were designed to do, which is typically in theatrical, to be up on a balcony rail or something like that and project light a long distance that you can then cut, because LECOs traditionally have a very hard edge beam, it would probably do really, really well. This would be probably one of the last things I'd take out on a location kind of shoot, because first of all, it's way too powerful and I would have to dim it just tons and tons, and I'd be working at the very smallest end of that. You can put a Fresnel lens on the front of these and get something soft, but I think there's better instruments to do that. So if you've got those parameters, if you've got a long throw and you want a shapeable light and you're doing kind of theatrical kind of stuff, this would probably be really good. It's probably chip on board as opposed to the old ones, which are what they're making now, which means you have a single point source, and that helps with the focusability of it. So looks like a solid thing if that's your use case.
Good, Courtney.
Yeah, what Bill said. It also has what they call ETC projection lens compatibility, so you can change the size of the projection spot, and it seems to have a more accurate lens system than most ellipsoidals, which a lot of times you'll see a little chromatic aberrations around the edges or around the gobo image that you're projecting. I think these you could almost probably put a glass slide into and project a slide of a background or something, other than just gobo.
They show gobos in the actual on their page, so yeah,
right.
You can absolutely do that. That's great. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Kern Kelly in Maine. What lens would you recommend for a Sony FX30 connected to an A10 Mini Pro used for streaming, similar to Alex's office hours setup, but in a high school setting, so autofocus is preferred?
Go ahead, John.
I really like the Sigma 24-70. It's a 2.8 lens, so it's really fast. Has some flexibility there. Also, the Sigma Trios, the primes, they have a 16, 35, and 50. Really nice kit to have as well.
Mitchell?
Yeah, it's a great, by the way, it's a QR code question coming in from Kern. It's a great selection there, John, 24 to 70, and it's a little bit more because it's an APS-C Super 35 sensor in it. What you really want to do, particularly if you're using it for a webcam, which obviously you're talking about, is you want that sweet spot between 35 and 45 so you can like get it right in the area there. But as far as cameras go with autofocus, a lot of the lower-end Sonys have it all the way down, all the way up. So you're in luck there. And if you want to see how good it can look at Alex's picture. That's a FX30 with a decent lens on it.
Yeah, this is an FX30 with a 1.4 G series 35 millimeter lens. So this is just so you know what that is, what you're looking at. So that's and that is the 1.4 gives me obviously a little shorter depth of field. I use a fixed lens so that I can go to 1.4, and that has to do with the fact that, the 2.8 I think looks great, by the way, and I've had mostly 2.8s for 24 to 70 is kind of my bread and butter lens. Like that's what I put in for my space. I picked a fixed lens because I felt the 35 with the multiplier is about 50 millimeter, and I think 50 millimeter looks really nice for someone without having to push the camera into the outside. So 85 looks great too, but it's pretty far away. But I think that as you go wider than a 50 millimeter on a full frame, you tend to. I found that when I did that here, it felt a little distorted, like I was a little too wide open. So I prefer the 50 or higher for my space. And I also wanted to have that really shortish depth of field. This wall behind me is about 8 feet behind me, so that gives you a sense of what a 1.4 looks like. It would be a little sharper if I had a 2.8. So that would be the kind of the process that I was balancing in that area. I do think that I'll eventually move to a full frame so that I can go to a 2.8 zoom, so I can make some more adjustments. It is one of those things, like the camera has to be at a certain distance. It's about 3 feet in front of me, and it has to be at that distance or it will not work. So it's not. That's the hard part with a fixed lens. Is the nice thing about a zoom lens that John recommended is that you get it where you get it, and then you make the fine adjustment. I have to make a decision about where that camera is for me. But I will say that works well, and I do recommend. I still shoot when I need for production, small production. I still use my Blackmagic cameras because I like the way they capture better than the Sonys. I did find I was out on a photo shoot yesterday and was taking my Sony, and I found about halfway through I switched back to my phone. I was like, this is gonna take a long time to get to these images. As I had the FX30 out, I was taking pictures of Golden Gate Bridge and stuff like that, and then I took them, and then I was taking them and then swapping back and forth to my phone, and then finally I put the camera back in the bag, and I was like, I'd just rather shoot with my phone, and so it is interesting how we've kind of moved forward. But as a webcam, I just swapped my wife's camera for her stuff to a Sony as well. My other Sony, my EV1, not the 10 Z10, which is like the little inexpensive Super 35, and it looks so good. Like I was just the Super 35 sensor with an autofocus, and the advantage of the autofocus is that you can go really short depth of field without feeling like you have to rock around or do anything. You get this really really nice bokeh, but you don't have to have focus issues, and that's the problem we had with Blackmagic, is that we'd shorten that depth of field, and then you couldn't stay in focus, and the Sony fixes that. Hey, go ahead, Chris.
A couple of things, Alex. You say it's a 1.4. Do you actually run it at 1.4, the f-stop?
Yeah.
Isn't it true that most lenses that
it's a little softer.
Actually, it looks a little better if you don't push it the f-stop?
It looks a little softer. It doesn't necessarily look better. It just depends on what you want it to look like. But it's sharper at 5.6. Yeah. I mean, especially around the edges. Around the edges, you tend to start to see more softening, which I don't care about. So the center tends to stay in focus even at 1.4. It's the edges that start to come off when you're at both ends of the lens. And then, curious, you said you were out with your camera. You were taking photos or video? A little bit of both, but mostly it's an FX30. I was mostly taking stills in that case. So you had it out. You had a battery on it. You had it with you. It was in your hand. And then I switched back to my phone. What made you switch back to your phone? It seems like the reason to go for the phone is the convenience, but you already broke the convenience by bothering to take all the stuff with you. The funny thing was is that what switched me back to my phone was I wanted to share some of the photos that I had, and I was like, oh, I can't share them from the camera. It's going to take a while to do that. And B, I'm so used to it, and the framing was easier. To be honest with you, the screen on my iPhone is so much better than the screen on my camera that it was easier for me to see what I was shooting. It was easier for me to frame because I had a fixed lens on my. I don't have a zoom lens for the Sonys yet because I haven't needed them, and so I had a 14 millimeter or a 35 millimeter. That's what I had. Those are the two Sony lenses that I have, or I could just jump around and get the framing the way I want it with my phone. But it was really my need to have GPS information about where I was shooting, because it's really like the problem that I really have later. And I know I'm going to get a bunch of comments in Discord about, hey, there's a way to tag your camera.
You're going to get the comments right here. Are you kidding?
I know, but there's a way to tag your photos in the camera later and everything else, but I never do that. And so the thing is that I realize that anything I shoot with my camera kind of goes into a black hole. Like I'll never find it again. The advantage now is that if I say Baker Beach, which is where I was at yesterday, if I say Baker Beach, it's just going to show me where all the photos that I took with my phone from Baker Beach. It's not going to show the ones that I took with my camera. And so I was like, these are really good photos. I mean, they're really nice. I didn't know that there's a beach in Baker Beach that you get definitely a postcard view of Golden Gate Bridge, not the Baker Beach that when you park, you have to walk up a hill and then down, and I still can't feel my legs. But you can. When I was like, walking up, going, this was a horrible idea.
What day was this?
Yesterday afternoon.
Okay, so I'm writing this date down, December 14th, the death of the DSLR.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway.
2023.
Anyway, and if I had more zoom lenses, I might have. But it was really me going through my head of, I won't be able to find these photos later. I better take a full amount. December 14th, 2023. That's of the DSLR. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Kern, for reference, this is a Sony FX3. It's a full frame sensor. But I think that the zoom would be a better choice for you, particularly in a educational institution, because you may have different scenarios that require a little more range than that. So I've got a 24 to 70 millimeter 2.8 GM. That's the top of the line Sony for that particular size. And I do get a decent amount of fall off for the bokeh. But I have it wide open, and that really works pretty well.
And I don't know what the Sony equivalent is. So the lenses, if I go out and actually do a shoot, or what I used to do with a Canon camera or with my Blackmagic camera, I have 16 to 35, a 16 to 35, a 24 to 70, 70 to 200, 100 to 400, and then I usually have 85 fixed and a 50 fixed. Those are that's the lens group that I typically, if I take that out, I can shoot almost anything I want to shoot. But if I'm going to get one lens, if someone said you only get one lens, it'd be 24 to 70. Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
So for me, I just, what you're saying resonates so much, because I had that circumstance at an art walk I shot about 2.5 years ago for one of my clients. I was hauling the big Blackmagic Pocket 6K, and I was trying to be really up in quality, but I did it. I put that down and I shot with my phone for about 5 minutes, and I just left the other one in the car for the rest of the day. It is so much more convenient to be able to do run and gun on a phone kind of form factor, and there's not that big a delta. There is a delta. There's a difference. And to me, I think of it in terms of, am I going to go take pictures or am I going to go make pictures? If I'm going to make them, if I'm going to take each frame individually and try to absolutely maximize it, then I want those lenses, I want all the manual controls and the rest of that. And if I'm just taking pictures, I'm astonished at how good they come out on this computational photography world we're living in with just a phone. Although I have to tell you, I'm starting to feel like I'm more of a picture maker with my phone than I've ever been before, just the last 5 or 6 times I've gone out to shoot. So my brain is almost like hurting because I'm getting good results, really good results with the phone. I
will say it really, something turned for me on the iPhone 14. Like, it's just the quality. There's something about the camera quality in the iPhone 14 that kind of pushed me over the edge of, this is what I should be. I mean, I just got really comfortable with shooting that. So, yeah. Next question.
Fermi Parker in London comes up next. Thanks for all the advice for nearly 3 years. How can I turn my Dana dolly into a motorized slider? Is there an update to the eMoto Spectrum? I think those are two separate questions.
No, they're connected to each other because the eMoto, you might be what you want to use with a Dana dolly. Go ahead, Courtney.
Oh.
Yeah, I think there's a version 4 of the eMoto out. I found another one out there from Kessler that's for $785. It's similar to the eMoto. It's basically a timing belt-driven attachment for your Dana dolly. So it has the timing gear here and comes with a timing belt. Or you have to order the timing belt. It's $5 a foot for that, and the clamps to put it on either end of your rails for the Dana dolly. So there's an alternative other than the Spectrum, eMoto from Spectrum.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, they sell them both together in this little kit. So they obviously have a lot of people who want to do this. This is the Dana dolly / eMoto Spectrum kind of combo kit that provides all the accessories that you normally need. But you're up there around $4,000. So if you're serious about it, know that the company has people who are doing this, and so it's probably a reasonable way to go. To me, a Dana dolly is a slider, and what this can do kind of diverges, but I guess people are using them together.
Yeah, I wouldn't. So the Dana dolly is a great dolly system, by the way. So the Dana dolly, basically, it's a big set of rollers that sit on top of you can put them on speed rail. So you can set these things on speed rail. They're big, they're easy, it's relatively inexpensive to put heavy cameras on it. You can get some great moves out of it. It is not designed to be a motorized dolly. There are great dollies that are designed to be motorized dollies, and I would highly recommend using those as motorized dollies. There's the original what was it? Anyway, there's a bunch of these that are really good at the original slider, which is, by the way, the beefiest slider I've ever seen in my entire life. It's like welded together. But there's all these other ones that will do these long and short slides. The Dana dolly that's just not what it was designed for. And I just wouldn't. I'd be really surprised if you get really great results from a motorized version of a Dana dolly. We've used them in a lot of shows, and we have operators back there moving them back and forth and going around. But I'm unsure whether that would really turn out. I would highly recommend thinking about a dolly that was mission specific to what you need. Next question.
Another QR code submission today. Andre Dole in Berlin says, LUT question, as I couldn't attend yesterday. Is it possible to bring a live camera into Resolve for a live LUT correction preview? That would shorten the process a bit for him.
Go ahead, John.
You can do this. I'm not sure if it's worth it. It requires a deck link. So if you haven't already purchased a deck link, loading in a video from a memory card or from a QuickTime capture is probably going to serve you better.
We've done it a fair bit, and it's great. Like, I will say that, now we're using Ultra Studio. So Ultra Studio Mini, you will go in there and it'll be identified by Resolve. And there's a little, I don't have Resolve open right now, but there's a little button in Resolve that says live. And now you see a live video. And what you're doing is you're applying all those nodes to the live video and getting to see it. And then you can save it out as a LUT. When I was working on the one that I was working on, because I'm walking back and forth, definitely thought about that. In case you're wondering, it does not see the ATEM input, which is what I really wanted. Like the UVC input from the ATEM would have been great, but I couldn't get it to see it. But you can, a DeckLink card or an Ultra Studio, both will show up. We didn't have any success with the little Ultra Studio, like the little one that you buy. We had success with the Mini. That's like a half rack to see it. It has to be one of those. There's a specific version that has to be to be seen by. But I do believe the DeckLink cards will work as well. Next question.
Adrian Watkins in Wellington, New Zealand up next. What's the panel using for video scopes and audio levels during the show?
Go ahead, CJ.
Well, we're really lucky that we have audio levels as one of the features of being on the Office Hours panel. So I don't monitor the audio levels on my computer except to look at maybe the mix pre. The video levels, no Omniscope's been recommended a bunch by the panel, but some people find it's too steep to do continuously. So if it's going to be more than 2 minutes, there's a free trial, but after 2 weeks, it only lasts for 2 minutes. There is a plugin for OBS called Color Monitor, and it's pretty nifty because what it lets you do is, you're going to see a lot of video feedback now. That's good. But what Color Monitor allows you to do is you can have a zebra, vector scope, a waveform, false color. I have a little zoom in for focus on my eyes. And I find that really handy because I can have a windowed projector of that scene somewhere just in my eye line, just as a confidence thing. So the Color Monitor, if you want for OBS, if you want the free one.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, my monitor space is kind of limited, so I'm with a hardware solution, and I use one of these little Andy Cine's. Sorry about the infinity thing there, but as you can see my levels, you can see my histogram, you can see all that. So it's a pretty handy little device, and there's my interrupter. Pardon me.
Yeah, so the two that the ones that I use right now, if you can get Spectre as an audio scope, and we use these scopes waves audio meter. When I'm talking about scopes, my favorite audio scopes are Spectre. They're sold by Synaptic, and I think they finally started selling them again. And there's like a little group that you have to buy together, but Spectre is still the best ones out there, in my opinion. The ones that I use on most machines, because the Spectre one's really expensive, is Sonic Atom. Sonic Atom is probably the second best one, at least on the Mac, that you can get, and that's by Loud Labs. They're also the ones that make SoundDesk that we talked about in the past. And there's just a lot more little tools inside of Spectre that we use in our audio history and stuff like that. There's really kind of specific things that I need that I really like in Spectre. And then for video scopes, I almost exclusively use Nobe Omniscope. I used to use a lot of other things, but the folks at the Nobe Omniscope, they're getting a lot of input, time and pixels. They're getting a lot of input from some pretty high-end folks, and what they're adding is all the things that you would want in a scope. In fact, that's the piece of software that has me not feel like I need a piece of hardware. It's not. There are places where I want to have a Fabrics because of portability. There's some SDI bit inspection that the Fabrics hardware does that I wish was in something on the Mac. But outside of for the general use of these things, there's a handful of places where on a big production that I'm going to want either a handheld Fabrics or but I think that or the hardware. But other than that, Omniscope fulfills all the things I need when it comes to video. Go ahead, CJ.
Just in some of the little things that Nobe does that you're not expecting. Like I drug a little window around my face to try and check skin tone, and all of a sudden, it put a mask over that, and now I can see just that. Like that was like, whoa.
I use that all the time. So you have this. There's this setup with Nobe where you can just select a certain area inside of an image to see where it's showing up on the scope. So it just and especially when you're trying to match your skin tones to the line, you can just go, because you can see a whole bunch of stuff in there, and you just select just what you want to make sure is on the line, and boom, it's there. It's a great piece of software.
Have you done the option click or shift click where you pin just a specific part of the image and then it'll highlight that on all the rest of the scopes?
No.
It is so it's so cool.
It's so cool. Anyway, we're going to have those guys on sometime next year. We've been going back and forth with them. It's really cool software. Next question.
Callum McCorkle's in from Bournemouth, Leeds, England. I've heard about different wiring to get better sound and video. What is an isolated ground mesh network, and how do you build it to have perfectly clean signals?
Courtney?
Well, these days it's a little bit less important than it used to be in the past with analog signal paths where ground differentials could get into your audio and your video. But nowadays with digital signal paths, it's less important because you don't see those ground loops as much since you're sending just ones and zeros, and noise. AC noise on that just reduces sensitivity of their senders and receivers, but it doesn't necessarily show up in the video or the audio if you're sending digital. But what it is you have problems with things that are grounded, connecting AC together on different sources of equipment that have different points of ground. In other words, in an installation, you have a ground plate that's usually put into the ground, literally, with a connection to it that drives the ground plane for all the AC hooked up to that particular transformer. And there's some mesh networks where you have multiple ground plates, and then there's a single point distribution where you have a large single ground plate, and that is distributed to the entire building. It's better to have a single point ground than a mesh ground, I think, because there's less chance for differentials from one side of the network to the other side of the network. But there is you can go on IEEE, and they have a whole published book on mesh bonded versus isolated bonding earthing network for indoor grounding. You just have to pay for it and download it, and it'll have everything you need to know about the difference between both of them.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, a lot of people go to a lot of trouble to make sure that their ground is very clean because it does affect the audio quality or the video quality. So if you're having problems and you can't track it down, a lot of times it's the quality of the power or the grounding that you have in your building.
Good, Bill.
And be careful about having too much of a good thing. I only say this because for the last year, as many people know, I've been doing audiobook work, and we're seeing people get rejected for having too low a noise floor. Literally, people who cut in zero sound on something like an audiobook, and that is an unnatural sounding thing. We talk a lot in video about room tone matching between different shots so that the background doesn't vary. But if you're suppressing it down to absolute zero, it can be a very unnatural sound. So most of us don't want background noise. You want appropriate all the way through where the levels don't shift depending on whether you're putting a slug or something in there.
But I think this is mostly just dealing with the ground so that you don't have buzz, and I think you definitely want to try to
that's
avoid
perfectly
that.
reasonable.
So it is really important to start thinking about it when it matters. So you're going to want to bring an expert in to figure out the grounds. Ground differential is, we're going to do a second hour at some point on it. We're not talking about power today, but we're not going to talk about it today. But it is pervasive. Like I was talking to someone about the fact that I was talking to an electrical engineer about stray voltage in general, which stray voltage is something that is a problem for our audio, but it's also a problem for things like cows. It kills cows, and so my dad does a lot of cases around this, and so because the big power lines will have a differential and they'll pass power into the ground, and the cows will feel it and then they won't eat, and then anyway. So but the interesting thing is, it's just fascinating how ground works. And so I think that there's a second hour there that we'll probably spend talking about how grounds work, because I think that we have to understand mechanically, because it's just a fascinating, like the fact that it will always look for the easiest way home is just a fascinating part of nature that I think we'll dig into. Next question.
Tony Mobley, Noonan, Georgia. Panel, any suggestions for using Blackmagic, the Blackmagic camera app? The image is too grainy. This was Wednesday on Conversations with Tony Mobley. Help, please. And he's got a link there so you can see it.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Looking at it, at least through my teleprompter screen in front of me here, I did not see a lot of grain. The color balance looked to be off, looked to be shifting green. I would also just make sure that you're at the native ISO of the camera on the iPhone. Make sure you're not pushing the gain too much. Doing that will definitely introduce grain, but I didn't see anything too noisy when I was looking at least in the monitor right in front of me.
Yeah, I didn't see any grain either. A little, maybe a touch of green, but I don't see any grain at all. And I will say that Chris Sabato, you look great. Like, when are you coming on the show? Like Chris looked amazing. So he's got the lighting, he's got the background, he's got the mic. It was great. It was and Chris, we already know Chris knows a lot. So come on. Anyway, next question.
Next one from Douglas Carmichael. Would there be any other vendors that make a toolless rack similar to Ubiquity's offering? And he's got a link to that one.
If you're looking for the rack mounts, I know that Jason Beisch had suggested ones that will work in any rack, and I just can't think of the name of them. These were they were screwless nuts. So this is I don't know what they're. I think that's what you're looking for there. Toolless. I think it's just that they all kind of pop together, but you can get ones that are. I think it's hard for me to get to it right now. I have some that I tested that just pop into the square, it's a, I don't know if you can assemble it that way. I mean, all they're doing is just putting screw mounts on. You can replace everything that you have on a lot of these things with hand screws, and then it'll be toolless. It's a little, I don't know. I wouldn't want to do this the whole time anyway, like just as an aside. Power drills are a really powerful tool when it comes to building racks. And I'd rather use a power drill or power screwdriver with the right tension setting than do it with my hands. Go ahead, Chris.
What would be the advantage of this? So you don't have to carry a screwdriver with you?
I guess.
Is your life so complicated that throwing a screwdriver
Well, it doesn't have the little
things
things.
is a problem?
I think it's, I don't, the problem that I'd have is that it just requires you to use all ubiquity stuff. I mean, like I don't know if it would work. I guess it does. It has little racks or something that you can do it. I think it's really designed for people who have decided they don't like building racks. I mean, for those of us who, I will admit, as someone who builds a lot of racks, I kind of like the more general purpose. You're paying, that's a lot of money for a tool, for a rack, so that, a lot of us would probably spend less and have a power drill. So the power drills are one of the most important tools in your rack is doing that. I will say that doing a 55-inch rack with hand tools is without a power drill. It's hard. You won't. So go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, you see a difference a lot on racks if it's for audio or if it's for communication or internet or computers. They always have those captive screws that you lock onto the rail. So there are different applications.
The one thing I will say is that what I didn't like, and the Helms got an open mic and they're typing, Chris. Somebody. Anyway, so I think that there's a whole bunch of so there's 1032s, 1224s, and then there are just square openings, along those things. And we used to hate when we saw a rack that had the square, the openings where you insert your own screw in. And I was like, oh, I don't want to do that. That's going to be a pain. I have to admit, the square holes in your rack are called adulting. So as soon as you get used to having them, you stop using the 1032s and the 1224. You might have a 1032. Typically, it's a 1224 screw that goes into those square inserts. And the reason you do that is because all you have to do is strip a couple of those on a rack. And now you can't use that rack until you replace the entire thing. You take everything out. Now you strip one and you just go, I'll just pull that little thing out, put it back in. And you realize why at every server, when you work with real server rooms, that's all you see. It's because, the IT guys figured this out a lot earlier than the AV guys. It's like, don't do that. Go ahead, Courtney.
What I do a lot of times is I found these things from Shearlock, these press-on knurled screw heads. So you can buy them for different size hex head cap screws, and you just buy the right cap screws to fit your rack, and you press these knobs onto them, and you got a toolless method of connecting your equipment. And they're just thumb screws, no tools required.
Next question.
Anawahai Black Bear Marshall in the Oahe Nation up in the beautiful Pacific Northwest is our next questioner. It was said that the Office Hours website is an industry leader. Please define industry leading in this context. You can't just state this without saying what specific things in a product make it an industry leader and who has publicly reported this as a source.
This is usually a Sunday question, so I'm just addressing it because I just want to let people know that if you ask questions internally about office hours, we'll typically push it to Sunday. But I just wanted to make sure we talked about it. Just to let you know, internal questions are generally a Sunday question. So you can ask again if you want to do that. But I don't know anywhere on our website where we say we're an industry leader. But maybe we do somewhere. I don't know where that is. I will say that there's probably no other show like this in existence. So I think that we're a unique thing in the industry. But go ahead, John.
I think maybe in context to the accessibility score, we're much higher than the average website. I think we're scoring high over 80% for accessibility. It's been a big focus for office hours. And so it's great to see the website representing that in a good way.
Yeah, and industry leading, I think, is, I would say the top 75%. So I think at least. Go ahead, Courtney.
He probably asked ChatGPT what is office hours, because I've found that ChatGPT uses this phrase, industry leader, in the area all the time. So that's probably where it came from.
Next question.
Jack Cannon in Phoenix, Arizona is up next. Jack says, for a paperless film set, what are your favorite apps for scripts, scheduling, and all things organizing? We're looking at Scriptation, Movie Magic Scheduler, and Program Similar.
We should really bring on a script supervisor. There was a script supervisor that, she had been doing it for maybe 30 years or 40 years, and she worked on a show with us last year, and she was completely on her iPad. Like there was never, she's like, I am never using paper. It was, and I'll have to go back and look at what she was using there. But it was, she was able to, all I know is she had the script in front of her. She was able to annotate it with her iPad, with her pencil, like write things on top of the script of what was happening, underline things, make things work. And it was really exceptionally easy to use. And it wasn't like a industry standard, but I don't remember which one it was. So I'll try to find it. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I haven't looked at this kind of software in a long time. There was a guy named Stephen Greenfield who kind of invented this whole genre with screenplay systems for formatting text and stuff for screenplays, and he also then created, I think, Movie Magic for scheduling. So look for if they're still around, Stephen Greenfield and Screenplay Systems. They were one of the originators of this. I don't know what's available now in the market though.
Yeah, I think that it might have been Scriptation, but I'm not 100% sure. But it was now one thing that we do use that I use a lot is the other one that I was looking at here is I use Movie Slate a lot because you can put so much information into it. And it's really easy to use. So it's just for the slate, but it's instead of having to do all the marker stuff, like I just type things in. So and there's a lot of things that can save and integrate and everything else, and so I find that useful. Next question.
Next one comes from Jack Ruppel in Breckenridge, Colorado, and Jack says, anybody using AI Warp with 360 link? I'd like to show 9600 baud modem rotary phone CRT monitor punch card computing while on camera discussing subjects prior to 1994.
AI Warp with 360 link. I think you have, Jack, you've reached an area that we haven't seen. You're in
It's pretty specific.
Yeah. Or is it Warp
a
AI?
9600 baud modem? I haven't seen one of those in
AI
a
at your
long
command.
time.
So Warp AI, that's kind of an interesting product. Let me save that. It is it's integrated into your it's AI integrated into your terminal. But it's Warp AI is what you might be looking for, so you can download it for your Mac. I don't know if it doesn't look like it's available for Mac and PC. It looks like it's just
talking
Mac.
about like a desk view.
It's a Warp. It lets you go. It lets you.
I realized my kind of brain locked when I saw I'd like to show, and then it's 9600 baud modem rotary phone CRT monitor punch card computer.
No. Yeah, I know, but Warp AI. So what it does? Oh man. Okay, I get it now. It took me a second to come around. All right, so check this out. So this is what you type in is search a file using regen and output the file, and then it wrote the terminal command to do that for you. Like this is
AI for terminal commands.
Like, how do I fix this error on my, if I'm doing something here? Oh man. Okay. All right. That's cool. Okay.
Alex is just lost another day.
I'm in, there's so many things I know how to do in the terminal, and I'll do them, but then I just run into these holes where I just go, oh, I don't understand how to do that. And then I figure out something on the way. And sometimes I do man and I try to figure it out. But a lot of times I just go find another way to do it because I don't have the time to sit there and read the man pages and do all the things. And that's why I'm not a particularly good terminal user. This fixes that. Theoretically, it might go horribly wrong. It'll give you an R dash. I won't say it on here, but as long as it never tells you that, it should be fine. The next question.
Next one comes from Guy Cochran here on the panel from Seattle, Washington. Did Canon start shipping a new lens? If so, what is it?
And he's throwing a Cochrane. We call a Cochrane. It's asked by Cochrane and answered by Cochrane. That's why we call it a Cochrane.
Throws the ball, he catches the ball.
Yeah, go ahead.
Amazing.
Go ahead, guys.
Yeah, I was watching one of these Instagram reels from our local rental house, and I didn't even know that this lens came into the market and it's shipping because he had it on his camera. So years ago, the Canon 5D Mark II came with a 24-105 as a kit lens, but it was an f4, and it wasn't parfocal. So this one, it's an RF mount, 2.8 with image stabilization, and you can get it with a power zoom. So with a red Komodo, you pop this on. This is going to be, for documentary filmmakers, this thing is going to be a powerhouse. So 24-105 is a lot of nice range. I mean, especially at 2.8. This is beautiful.
$3,000. That's a lot of lens for that.
Yeah, that's great. Go ahead, Chris.
Trivia question: do you know why Canon makes their big lenses white?
Because you know that the Canon lenses. Why? Why do they make them white?
Heat. The black lenses gather more heat. It knocks the lens out of whack. They made them white to keep them cooler.
Wow, there's our trivia for the day. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, Go ahead,
It's
CJ.
important in Arizona.
And forgive me, I'm a 6D Mark II guy. Can you take an RF and convert to to get it onto an EF or something like that, or how much trouble do you have converting those lenses?
No,
you can convert, but it's not going to be as fast on the autofocus. So that's one of the things about the RF mount. But there are RF to EOS adapters.
I've got that 24-70 in that same 2.8, but I'm always feel like I just want a little bit more zoom.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Canon has really locked down the lens. They're not letting anybody use produce for the lenses. And it was I had a conversation a couple of days ago about someone who had to then make a decision. And this is what you want to be very careful about as a camera manufacturer. And we'll see how this all turns out. But camera locked down the new lenses, and so they have an old Canon camera, and they have to now decide, like, do I want to buy a new camera with a bunch of new lenses? Like, that was and Canon, is locking it down because they were, everyone's making all this money off of their platform, and they know the lenses are important, but that person is moving to Sony. Like, it was like, and it was like, they were just like, I had to make a decision, and I looked at what I'm doing now, and there was no way I could leave the Canon ecosystem because I've got, 16 lenses or whatever. But when I had to make the choice, I then had to make this. This is always the careful thing you have to be very careful of, is not making people make choices about things. And they're in the process of selling all of their lenses, all their Canon gear, and moving over to Sony because they were forced to make a choice. And that was it. Like, it was like they can make the EFs better, or they felt like they moved that lens mount to lock it down. and I don't know if that's the case, but it'll be really interesting to see how well Canon does, because I think that I have a lot of Canon stuff and I have a lot of Canon lenses, but I think that they're a little behind. I think that Sony has really done a really good job of kind of lapping everybody on a lot of the technology, except for overheating, which they haven't figured out. But I think that it'll be really interesting to force everybody into a new space and see whether creators make the decisions that they want. Because Sony's spending a lot of time investing in creators. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. I finally upgraded from an Amplify Alien Router, Ubiquity's consumer brand, to Unify Express. What interesting features of the Unify platform are there?
That it's more stable. The Amplify, as an Amplify owner. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, what you get is a really nice dashboard. It really gives you good insights into the network, what's happening, who's talking, when they're talking. Those can be very beneficial if you're, seeing network spikes or anything that's happening that's affecting the quality of your connection. You also get really good insights, the ability to program and manage the wireless devices. With the Unify Express, I believe you're limited to 5 devices total. So, you can't throw a bunch of cameras or anything like you can with the larger units, but it's solid for most, small home offices.
Next question.
Sean Johnson, New York. Hi, guys. Is NDI virtual input for Mac still only 720? If so, are there any hacks to make it feed 1080 into Zoom?
I I don't think that there was a limit there. I think it might be the limit for Zoom. So I guess the question for you is, are you my question for you on that, in that case, is, are you on do you have 1080p working in other places in Zoom? So that would be the only question I'd have for you, because is it something that is just a Zoom oriented problem, or is it something that because I don't think, does anyone else know? I don't think the 1080 is limited to 720 going into Zoom. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Well, if it was an old Intel Mac and it only had a dual-core processor, it might be the Zoom limitation when they do the core count and limit you to 720. But that's the only thing I can think of.
Yeah, that actually might be the case. Hold on. Sorry. Next question.
Douglas Cormichael says, Alex, I remember when you mentioned that large Mandalorian-style LED walls and or volumes need a fair amount of power. Are there online tools, like maybe something from H2R Gear, that can help calculate power consumption of a system and balance loads appropriately?
Go ahead, John.
I'm not familiar with any system online. I use Excel, but you're really going to want to pay attention to the manufacturer specifications and then pipe that data into whatever you're using to track, and then break out your circuits appropriately, and understand also like how much data you can push through the Ethernet cables that are going through the video processor. Understand how you're going to have to break apart that image as well.
Next question.
Chester Sweeney in Las Vegas, Nevada is the next one. With the release of the first 5 episodes of The Monarch Legacy of Monsters, what was the panel's thoughts, good or bad?
Has anyone seen Monarch yet?
Yeah, I watched the first 2 episodes. I thought it was charming. It was interesting that the big stars didn't show up in the first couple. It's one of these things that has the traditional history of Godzilla and Mothra and that kind of thing, but in a story arc. And there's a lot of production value there. They spent a lot of money on it. I was enjoying it, but we got distracted and I didn't go back to it.
Go ahead, CJ.
Yeah, we're 3 in it at home watching it right now, and I think it's really beautifully shot. I wasn't sure if there was intercut footage with an earlier film that I just didn't see or not, but I felt like it took me a second though to understand with the there was a lot of time jumping back and forth. So it's not something that you want to, if you're the kind of person that watches TV and goes on your phone at the same time, this is not the show for that. You need to watch because you will be very lost.
You know, it's interesting. I have really stopped doing that. If I'm going to sit down and watch TV, I just watch TV. You know, I don't do a lot of other things. And I find that I just feel like if I'm wasting time at that point, like just blowing time. Like I'm either going to be entertained and I'm going to be in what I'm watching, and I know that that's very like not what most people do anymore. But
I get annoyed when people come to my house to watch a movie and then like I get my home theater, it's all set up to watch the movie, and then they're on their phones. I'm like, I'm offended.
You're offended. Get out of my house. No nachos
like
for you.
I worked really hard. You know how much I made the popcorn and everything.
I know. Did you make good popcorn? Did you use it? You're even closer to Amish.
Oh yeah,
country.
We get it by the barn load.
Oh man, it's the Amish popcorn is the best. It is. I do find that it's also because I watch stuff that I feel like that are complicated enough that I have to watch. You know, I have to pay attention to it. I have to admit that I would love to say that I'm watching the Godzilla, but right now Reacher just came out again, the second season. And so I tried not to watch both of the first 2 episodes at one time. I was like, okay, I'm just going to hang on, just go very slowly. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, if you're looking for a monster movie or a monster show, it's not really that. Monsters make cameos, and the rest of it is a lot of plot threads that are very hard to follow.
That's a very, that's a very Godzilla approach. Like we see things like when you go back. One of the things that I felt was really interesting. I went in the theater to see Godzilla -1 because it had so much like they did this for $15 million, and so I wanted to see what it looked like in the theater. It wasn't. I mean, they said it looked like $200 million. It doesn't look like $200 million. It looks like a really good $15 million. So there's lots of little shortcuts.
It's well shot. It's certainly well shot, and the effects are spot on.
The effects
really I really don't like the plot lines because you really have to invest a lot of time into following.
I was talking about Godzilla -1. And
I'm talking about this Monarch show.
In Godzilla -1, I guess what I would say is that what I really liked about it, it was a very classic Godzilla movie. And I think that if you look at Monarch, it's probably, if you're not seeing the monster very often, if you go back and I grew up watching Godzilla movies. So, I mean, Sunday morning, it was always, instead of going to church, I watched Godzilla movies and Charlie Chan. And anyway, so there wasn't that much. If you really remember back to those things, there wasn't that many Godzillas because it was really expensive to do it. And so what they did is they would have these moments where suddenly Godzilla's blowing up everything, and there'd be like a 5-minute piece of that, and then it would go back to lots of like you don't see the monster, and that's also a Shyamalan, M. Night, like you barely ever see the things that happen, and the idea is to build it up so that they matter. Yeah,
it reminds me a lot like Walking Dead because it's really not about the zombie creatures. It's about some interpersonal stuff that's going on. And then every once in a while, when you least expect it, there's a Walking Dead right there.
Right.
So it's the same thing with Monarch.
Yeah, Bill.
Yeah, one of the sub-themes of this is Kurt Russell is one of the big stars in it, and his son Wyatt also stars. But the thing is, he doesn't show up until like episode 3, which was surprising to me. And I thought, well, this feels like a really international release. They're looking for the global film market, and it wasn't so much a tentpole for the American market. It was global. And because of that, I think the amount of time they spend setting up plot and getting you to care about the characters and the rest of that, I think you have to stay with it a while if you want to really enjoy the whole thing.
Yeah, and Kurt Russell should be about 90 years old. I don't know how they figured that out.
Yeah, looked pretty good in there.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how a lot of them, there's kind of this pentameter of a lot of these shows, which is that I'm going to give you a bunch of effects in the first episode. And then at the last episode, I'm going to give you a bunch of effects so you'll come back for the next season. And then the middle ones, like 3 and 4 and 5, you're like, this isn't very good. Like, and you wonder whether, and then they pick it back up again. Like, if they can get you through that trough, because they save a lot of money doing that. Like they don't show you as many effects in the middle, and then they put the money into the ends. And so it's an interesting, puzzle to unwrap there. But I thought that the best one ever for like a cameo was with, I think it was Air Force One, where they really promoted that Steven Seagal was in the movie, and they showed all these things with Steven Seagal in the movie. I'm going to do a bit of a spoiler. I'm just warning everybody. Steven Seagal gets killed in like the first 10 minutes, and it's like the funniest thing is just that I just ruined it for Chris. It's 20 years old. I'm just going to tell you. So anyway, so the funny thing is like it's a snap. Like it all just happens really fast, and you're just like, and they put all the promotion to it. I thought it was the best thing when they did it. I thought it was great. Next question.
Next question comes from Roscoe Jones, Madison, Indiana. What are your thoughts on using cheap signaling devices during live productions? And he's got a link there to something.
Go ahead, Courtney.
I'm not sure what they're going to be using this for. I think the thing that maybe I got, here's what came up, which is this wireless doorbell. That's a cheap signaling device with a remote IP65 button that triggers a loud chime with 65 different choices of chime and 5 volume levels. I'm not sure how you'd use that in a live production unless you're going to use it as a doorbell sound effect, ding dong. It would work fine, but I don't see any reason to have a wireless one because you can just put a microphone on a door chime at the sound effects desk and pipe it to your PA system. But I'm not sure the use that he's talking about.
Go, John.
Yeah, I just think of like how important is this to your show? And is it worth spending something more on? I've done, if it's just like notification when it gets someone's attention, I've done simple point-to-point voice over IP stuff, just using SIP to be able to communicate and set up like small phone networks so I could call or notify or set that to a ringer that just rings when you dial an extension that you build out. Very simple to do and probably going to be much more reliable than this doorbell from Amazon.
Go ahead, Chris.
I don't know, Roscoe. It seems pretty straightforward. As long as the majority of your crew actually understands Morse code and can, use it as such, I think it's a great idea.
If I assume you're signaling people to go on stage or signaling people to do things, I'd be more likely to just find a switch and turn it on. Just use some kind of switch that I turned on. I don't know. I know it's wireless, but I will say that for queuing and for interacting with folks, I try to minimize the amount of wireless that's in a production. I know some people really think it's great. Obviously we use wireless comms, But when it comes to doing signaling, when it matters, I want a wire that goes there that does the thing, because oftentimes it doesn't go and do the thing. Let's go to the next question.
Next question is from Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. What's the most difficult to produce Christmas show we might see this year?
Real quick, Mitchell.
The Star Wars Christmas special.
I have a feeling that the Hannah Waddington one was pretty hard to produce. I looked at some of I watched the video a little bit, and I was like, some production value. Apple put some money into that, so like they put all the money into it. It's pretty interesting. She's actually a pretty good singer. So quick reminder that we're going to jump into power here in just a second. We will have our new volunteer meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. I will post that in Discord. You can also sign up on the email. So you can go to the email that we send out every morning, and you can sign up for volunteers, and you'll get added to that automatically and directly. But if you're in Discord, you'll see the link a little before 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. So if you're interested in being a panelist, or I'm sorry, a volunteer, jump in. All right, welcome back. And we are now going to talk about power and talk about how we use power. And power is it's very different as we, kind of go from, our office power to event power to mobile power. I think that, like thinking about what those things look like obviously have much, much different structures. So the panelists can raise their hand if they want to talk about how they approach it. I know that for me, my home power, of course, I'm not trying to rebuild the infrastructure of my house. So I have, I most of the things I do think about what I put in my office, in that I want it to be a relatively low draw. I'm not going to put lights or other things that are going to take up a lot of power. Even these little lights that I have in my background here, those are 6 watts. So they're very, very little LEDs that look like incandescents, but I would never put an incandescent because that would take too much power. So and create heat and all kinds of other fun things. So I think that it's really interesting for us to think about what we look at there. I know for me as well, as I have a series of 3 UPSs in my room in my house that I buy. So when in doubt, I buy the APS 1500 VA UPS, and I buy the same one all the time. And the reason I do that is because then all the batteries interchange. They all interchange. They're the first ones at APS. They're the lowest ones I think that APS makes, unless they've added new ones where you can take the battery out. So you can take the battery out. If you're flying with it, you can flip it and put a little thing on it. And TSA will actually let you ship them, but you just have to put them into a plane. But you have to flip the battery so that the contacts aren't there. That's what makes batteries catch fire, is that they start pulling. So if you you can flip the battery in the 1500 VA. I have one set up to my non-critical things like lights and everything else. I have another one set up to for my computers and everything else that I need to run the show. And I have another one just dedicated to my router. So my router and modem and everything else, I have them all set up there so that I can guarantee that, and that will last if we lose power here. And we do think about it enough, or a fair bit. And the reason that we think about it is that we lose power a lot. We're in Northern California. Welcome to California. I know that we spend a lot of money on taxes, but evidently we don't get power. That doesn't come with the taxes. So the APS, the other thing about it is it tells you what's going on the front. So you have buttons. It's giving you information. So it tells you, like, for instance, in this draw, this is how long I will last. That is a super useful number to have. Like, I know that it's 16 minutes or it's 21 minutes. I am looking for a minimum of 15. I want to make sure. And like everything else that I do is I try to minimize the load that goes through it. So I'm trying to be at 60% capacity. I try to keep it because it may surge, it may go up, it may go down. So I want to make sure that I'm still running below that, that 60%, it's 40 to 60% is what I'm trying to keep these all inside of. So anyway, so those are at home. And then, at work, or what we're doing, then we're really starting to talk about dedicated power, so we are, we're looking for shared grounds. We're looking for making sure that we have, oftentimes I think the nominal when someone asks like, what do you need for your racks in your room and everything else, we're usually asking for a 200 amp service. 200 amp single phase service is what we want to have there. We do have to figure out, do we have two sources of power that we can switch over to? If we don't, then we have generators. And so and for shows when we didn't have them in, we didn't have two sources of power in 3210. And so what we did is we literally had a generator outside that we were now we didn't do the kind of this. We were a little too superstitious to have an automatic switchover. So what we did is we had enough UPS that we had a solid 15 minutes across all of the racks to switch over, and we had a very few number of places that we had to switch over. There's like 4 places that we had to, I think it was 4, but it wasn't very many things that we had to switch over to switch all the racks to the generator. So and we would practice that. so anyway, so that is a that's different. And then once you get into doing it remotely, a lot of times what you're doing is thinking about, is it shore power? Is it remote power? Shore power is coming from the building. So I'm going to, or am I going to bring it, typically referred to as a genie or generator. And oftentimes we do a little bit of both. We usually want 2 sources of power, like everything else. We want 2 sources of internet. We want 2 sources of this, and we want 2 different power points, to have there. You do have to think about it throughout the entire show. We had a show where we did the entire rehearsal on one generator, and the goal was at 6 a.m. we would switch to 2 generators because that saved us like $6,000 a day, and it was like 3 days of setup. And the client wanted it. I recommended, fortunately, I recommended that we leave them on the whole time, and they turned it down, and then the head gasket on the main generator died at 3 a.m., 3 hours before the second one was brought back up. And that caused a lot of chaos. And so so those are the things you want to think about, all the things that need to be taken down. One of the things that I do when we set up our gear remotely is I'll pull the plug out of something. So I'll just pull the plug out and make sure that everything's on the UPS. So whatever the main plugs, I'll just pull them out and just look at what happens. You should hear a lot of beeping and a lot of but no monitors turn off, no. And I've had situations. We had one in the Excel Center in London where they just miscalculated the power, and half of the building lost power. Like the circuits blew for half the building for a pretty large event. I mean, there's 8,000 people there, and the whole room that we were in all went black, except for the stream. So the stream, all the modems, everything else. And if you want job security, have a client see everything in the building, including the main room, go black, and your little island is all on, and you have, and they run over and go, well, what's going on? And I'm like, everyone lost power. We'll be right back. Slide up. We're still streaming. It's not what you want for a show, but it definitely reminds you that it does happen. Like those things do happen, and that's the one thing you want to be careful of. Is thinking about that. The other thing that we worry a lot about is clean power. So making sure that the power that you're getting is clean, or it's going through something that's going to clean it. We had a situation where we were getting square waves instead of sine waves from a generator, and some of our UPSs didn't actually die, but they did start smoking because they were getting the wrong thing. Now that would have destroyed our entire infrastructure. Had we been directly connected to that power, none of our electronics would work. And that was 2 hours before a show in the middle of nowhere. Like that would have been, hey, I know that this was the launch of your new product, but we will not have a show today. And so power is a really integral thing that you want to take into account. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, Alex has done a beautiful job of talking about live shows, and it's its own special beast, and I think that secondary and tertiary backup is mission critical for that. I've been mostly in field production, so mostly I'm concerned with powering gear from the top end of having to do a remote shoot outside a building and we need to light it up, all the way down to literally the power that can kill you in a AAA or AA battery if you don't manage them correctly for a particular piece of mission critical gear. At the top end, whenever I'm going to bring a generator on site, I really want a real gaffer. Gaffer is the chief electrician on any set, and it's just you're up at that area where it can be dangerous if you wire things poorly. You don't want to have bad grounding and be running a generator and having a lot of wattage running around your set, particularly if it starts raining or something like that. You want it really done right as a safety measure. you move down from that, and most of us, when we started out, were using kind of the big brick batteries, Anton Bauer and V-mount batteries from Sony and other people. And to me, it was interesting because I spent a lot of money on chargers and those kind of batteries, and they don't last forever. You get a few years out of them if you're really lucky and you treat them really well. But they're expensive. The chargers were expensive. The batteries themselves were expensive. In the middle of my career, we saw the old traditional batteries kind of get pushed aside by lithium mixtures and NiCads and things that were better. They lasted longer. They were less heavy. And so we were able to work with those for a long time. But eventually I saw a migration as equipment got smaller and we were into more camcorders and less the big shoulder mount cameras to things like the Sony NPF series batteries. They're much smaller. They're pretty dense in terms of the amount of power that they hold. And the great advantage, and the reason that I bought a lot of those and most of my field power comes off of those, is they're adaptable. You can find a lot of things like a little sled that'll take an NPF battery on top of a DSLR or a Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera and run that for a significant period of time. In the case of Blackmagic, way more significant than their little L batteries that only last 15 minutes or so in the camera. And then down on the bottom end, I also spent a good little bit of time looking at it, investing at the Eneloops and the things on the small area to take care of wireless body packs and things like that. Some of the things I learned real quick is when I buy them, I date them. You always put something on the battery and you write the date it was put in service. Because again, like the batteries at the top end, they have a certain life and a number of charge cycles. And if you don't manage how your batteries are aging, you can find yourself completely charging something overnight, relying on the field, and you're only going to get an hour instead of the 3 or 4 or 5 hours you're expecting. That's particularly dangerous in things like a radio mic system, where you're really expecting that talent to be able to keep going, and you find that your batteries are aged and you start getting radio hits on them. So batteries, but power across the board is one of those very important things to pay attention to, manage, and create a structure so that you're always sure that when you need to power something up, it's going to power up and last.
I will admit that my ritual, usually the day before I go anywhere, is knowing exactly where all my power chargers are and making sure that all my batteries are at 100%. So like, I just want to make sure that it takes time. It just takes time to do these things. And you can very quickly find your way out. And I start marking them with little Post-its of like, this one's been charged, this one's been charged, this one's been charged, to make sure that I have a stack of batteries that are ready to go to make that actually happen. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, if you're not providing the power distribution for your tech equipment and you're going to be plugging into the wall, it's always a good idea, especially if you've got a case that has power distribution in it, is a couple of things to look for. Make sure that the source of power you're plugging into in the facility isn't a GFI. If it's your main source of power, ground fault interrupters, these are what those sockets look like. They usually have 2 buttons on them. Sometimes they're red and black, and sometimes they're just white. One's for test, and the other is for reset. And what those do is they trip if they detect any voltage going to the ground connector on there. And that's kind of dangerous. If you're plugging in different equipment that is plugged in somewhere else into your system, and the signals are coming in over B and C cables, let's say, or audio cables that have a common ground, it can trip these ground fault interrupters when you least expect it. And you don't want your whole case of equipment and signal distribution going down in the middle of a show. So make sure that these GFIs are required by code in most bathrooms and in most kitchens. So you'll find them there. Usually they're kind of expensive, so most electricians won't put them in on every outlet, but be careful about plugging into those. I know they're there for your safety, but your whole show is going to go down if somebody plugs something in that's connected wrong to a wrong ground. The other thing is test if you're going to be plugging into power that you're not distributing, in other words, somebody's house or some venue's location, wall outlet somewhere. Pick you up one of these kilowatts. They're about $30, and they can tell you. You plug it in, and it can tell you what the voltage is and how much current your equipment is pulling. So turn everything on in your rack and then plug it through the kilowatt and see how much current you're pulling. If you're pulling more than 12 amps, I'd see about having another source of power, because most situations have 15 amp breakers back, and may blow the breaker if you're anywhere close to going over 15 amps. So be careful about the amount of current you're using, and the kilowatt can tell you how much current you're using over a longer period of time too, so it can track all of that stuff. Two good things to have.
Good, John.
Yeah, so when I start thinking about power, I start also like not even just two sources, but what are my devices that are single homed? So you really want to start looking at potentially adding in your rack automatic transfer switches that are able to plug into both those power sources and leverage that, whether that's before the UPS or even inside. If you're going to do like A side, B side power, most of the stuff I do is more data center related. So I'm running A and B side power to every rack, and then any single home devices I'm supplementing with these automatic transfer switches. What Alex said is great. I love the 60% rule. A lot of times I'm deploying redundant UPSs as well. And so for that, I'm sticking closer to 40-50% because I'm trusting that failover is going to happen, and I don't want to exceed any sort of thing in that capacity as well. Really take into
and in this case, what you're doing there is you're just to kind of outline you have UPSs on everything, so there's no interruption. So when that automatic power transfer happens, even if there was a glitch, the UPSs are all going to be still managing the power in between that dropout.
Yep. And then we also put the devices before our UPSs that will actually take extra signal to ground, and those can fail first before I break a giant UPS unit. So just like looking at, from my perspective, we're managing a very large UPSs. We're running at 480 volts. We're doing bus bars into racks. Those are much more complicated, and you're talking a lot of current that it can do a lot of damage. So we just want to be extra careful with anything that we're plugging in. We know what it does. A good also practices, if you're having anything that's using high volume of electricity, is we always burn everything in. So before anything enters my data center or enters an IDF, it's running for multiple days. We understand, because fire, anything like that could happen, or a faulty component. We want to make sure we're burning those things up before we permanent install. Same thing I do for anything I do in the road case, is just making sure it works as it's expected. I pull apart, pull it back together, build it all, burn that rack in, and then before I deploy anything. So those are my thoughts around just the generals of power.
Yeah, and we're talking. A lot of us are talking about redundant power because that's probably what we think about the most. The other thing to think about is when you start to build racks is PDUs. Your power distribution, and these. A lot of us are buying trip lights. That's how you get started. I'm going to put a triple light on my rack, and you think about that as your power distribution. But these power distribution blocks can get much more complicated. So you want to think about, as you start to build larger racks, having PDUs that, for instance, are available on the internet. We have a lot of PDUs that we put into larger rack systems, and John can probably talk to some of these, where I can tell you how much power it's drawing. I can tell you what outlet is drawing the most power. So when you talk about this is like the giant version of what Courtney was talking about with the kilowatt. I have every outlet. I know exactly what's actually happening, and I can turn those outlets on and off. So if I need to if I need to refresh something needs a restart, I can simply just turn its power off. Now that has its own risks. You want to be very careful. If someone gets in there and turns things off, it creates a little bit of havoc. But it does allow you to manage those things more effectively. So, and I have to admit, 10 years ago, if someone said, what are you using for your rack PDUs? And a lot of these run vertically up the back of the rack. I wouldn't have known what to say. I'd be like, I don't know what I'm using. And the other thing to look at is that a lot of these are not the C15s that you're used to. These aren't the wall. Typically, I think there are a lot of different things, but they can be C14s. You have
C13 to C14 is what you typically see. And those are like much more secure for permanent installs.
100%.
And then you can actually also get ones that have like a locking mechanism. So they'll expand into the port so they can like withstand vibration, things that happen. You'd be surprised at how much vibration happens in a steel building. Like we install these in all our IDS because we have power plugs falling out, and we replaced those with that, and all of a sudden that went away. So just little things you don't think about, you start seeing at a larger scale, and then you start addressing those issues one by one.
Right, and I just want to outline the power. Since we're talking about power, I just want to have this little public service announcement that the power that goes into the back, the cord that goes into the back of your computer, is not an IEC cable. Well, it is, but that's not it is one of an IEC. All of the cables are IEC cables. It's just which version of that IEC cable. So a lot of people we get into this when we're loading in, and people will be like, "Oh, get me an IEC cable," and I'll hand them something, and they'll be like, "That's not an IEC." I'm like, "It is. You just didn't ask for which one you wanted. Do you want a C8 and a C7, which is like the figure 8? Do you want a C13 to a C14? The one that you plug into the wall is typically a C15. There's lots of different versions of how these look, and you got to get used to looking at them as C something. And you can very quickly, I'm not going to put them up here, but you can find that information. But it's really important because, and then what you do is you end up getting a lot of jumpers. Like a lot of us I have a lot of different lengths of those, so that when you're building something, you're not pulling it straight to it, but you're able to figure out the route that you're going to do, and you have something that's as close as possible. And there's some people that I know that build those. I don't. Like I don't want to be the one that wired the thing that didn't work. So I try to find ones that are as close as possible. Go ahead, John, I think, and then Courtney. Did you want to add something else, John?
No, I was just going to talk about the C13. So thank you.
Yeah. So C13, be precise. Anyway. So go ahead, Courtney.
Well, Alex, did you look up in your little book of See Something, Say Something, what the power connector for that HP oscilloscope behind you is?
I don't know what it is, actually. I don't know if it exists anymore. It is a little bit of a project. So Courtney, over here.
Other shoulder.
Courtney gave me that little oscilloscope, and it's got like a different power supply. And Courtney's like, well, you just put pins on it and plug it in. I'm like, I don't want to put pins on it and plug it in. I have to have like a connector for it, and I can't find it. So what I'm doing right now is it is a project that's happening over Christmas. I'm going to build a 3D model of I'm digitizing it, like just so I have like a little, so I have the data, and then I'm going to print something that will go in there properly, and then I'm going to put the power into that. And
how long is it going to take you to get that UL approved?
I'm not going to, I'm going to be past the UL on that one. So yeah. I just want to do something that I'm going to build that out a little bit more so that I feel
safe way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah,
use
I
TPU.
Think that TPU is what I'm planning to use for that. Okay. So it'll just kind of pop in there. So stay tuned. I will show everybody once we figure it out. By the way, CJ, did you notice I have the brick wall? I have the same brick walls. I don't know. So I pushed it back a little bit. It's another thing. We won't get into it anyway. So we'll talk about that if someone asks a question about it. I changed my background. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Matthew LeCount in Oakland. Building out a flight case for switching shows, recommendation or need for power conditioning? Thanks.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, the go-to usually for rack case power distribution is Furman. And this MD8X Plus one has one outlet on the front of it and 8 on the back. It has these little pull-out lights that are really handy. So if you put it in the bottom or the top rack mount of your 5-up or 6-up, it has a voltage readout on the front of it, and these 2 little pull-out lights that kind of point up or point down, depending upon where you put it in the rack, to light up the front of your equipment. It has a single switch, and it has one outlet on the front to plug in, the extra stuff that you're going to want. And they're reasonable, about $100. You can find them at most guitar centers, any kind of place that sells audio-video equipment. That's one way to go. Another thing to realize is that when you have these power strips that are mounted in racks, and you have a lot of things that are powered by wall warts that are plugged into the back, figure out some way to attach those wall warts to the power strip so they don't fall out when the case gets bumped. Because when you're shipping something that has a bunch of wall warts plugged in, the weight of that transformer sitting on the back there will work its way out, and all those wall warts will be unplugged by the time you get there. So I usually sometimes put a piece of Velcro, either hard Velcro or the soft Velcro, one on the power strip and one on the inside of the wall wart. So when you stick the wall wart, the Velcro kind of holds it in there, keeps it from vibrating out. So that's one solution. The other is tie wraps, which are dangerous because you can't unplug it in an emergency. But think of some method of securing those wall warts into the power strip.
Yeah, and one thing that I would not recommend, well, we used to do this and we've kind of moved away from it, is we try to not put you want to rack mount your UPSs sometimes into but the problem is that they're really heavy. And when you give a lot of weight, a lot of G's, they bend the rack or they push into other things, when they're being dropped upside down or whatever. There's a lot of weight and there's a lot of inertia there. So we kind of got into the habit of just shipping the UPSs separately. So we have them, again, these 1500 VAs that we're going to do. Now we do them when so like flight case can mean a lot of different things. So a flight case, we're going to assume that you're actually checking in. So that's what I would do, is to typically have a separate Pelican case with my UPSs that I would go out with. I wouldn't, if I'm going to a location that I don't know, I am not going to just have power conditioning. I am going to have a UPS, and it has to do with the fact that we've had ones where forklifts ran over our power. While they're setting up, people tripped over the power. Someone didn't think this power was important. People were breaking down while we were still streaming. There's a whole bunch of things that can go wrong. And I will not do a show anywhere in the world. I mean, like literally, I was in Rwanda, and it was that people thought I was crazy. I found a place that sold the 1500 VAs and put them into place for a show that we were doing. And of course, tent lost power. And someone ran over to me. What's happening? I'm like, nothing's happening here. like I have a stream. I have a we'll be right back slide up. I'm fine. You lost audio and you lost part of the lights, but that's not in my purview. Anything in my purview has got a backup, and so that's you really want to think about that, because you get bit a lot. I would say a solid 15% of the time that I've not had a backup, I've been bitten by it in some way, shape, or form. Next question.
Comes from Callum McCorkle in Bournemouth. Leads again. How do I make it so that external power connections for our briefcase systems or mobile racks are completely waterproof? Is True One a waterproof option, or maybe CEE?
Wow, that's a great question. And I have to admit, I'd love to see your cases and what you're doing and why you're doing that. I don't build things that are waterproof because I don't put my equipment in a place that it would need to be waterproof. So I don't know. I don't have an answer for you, mostly because I won't do it. Like I will be like, hey, where's my tent? Or I'll buy a tent or bring a tent or do something. I don't tend to work in environments where, and I think some people do. I haven't had to work that much on the ship. I've worked a couple times on a ship, and we've had to worry about that a little bit. But I haven't done a lot of waterborne things. But if I am on the ground, I have paid attention to that process. In fact, I had one where we got a lot of rain at an event, and we realized there's a 400 amp power supply that's going right past our booth that's underwater. The water's going over it, and that's when I told them, you're gonna have to move us somewhere else. We can't be here. I know we're all set up, but this isn't gonna go. And so usually when you list the problems, like, hey, people might die, or your show won't work. I don't know which one you think is more important, but you may lose the show halfway through the event. So let's move this somewhere where it's not in the rain. Go ahead, John.
Use gravity as much as you can. Seal the inputs and outputs of the power going into the case. Just remember that water will most likely always find a way. So anything you can do, nothing is waterproof. Even IP67, whatever rating they want to do it can withstand some water, but water will find a way. If water gets onto the electronics, it will fail. And so anything you can do to avoid it inside your case, meaning wrap it in plastic, anything that will withstand water getting off of the device is going to be your best bet.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, kind of what John said is depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to make something so that there's no water ingress into your case when it's being shipped and not plugged in, you've got those connectors that are exposed to the outside. Use silicone to seal them up on the back sides and around the edges of the connector where it's bolted into the case. That'll prevent water ingress. But a waterproof connector for AC, I guess you could get those. They're going to be kind of expensive, and I wouldn't want to necessarily use AC power into something that I'm exposed to heavy rainfall or something, or big puddles, or underwater, God forbid it falls into a lake or something. I would not want to use AC connected to any of that stuff. I'd use some type of DC power.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, as was said earlier, I was just looking it up, and there's true unconnectors from Laird, but they're IP65, so they're not completely waterproof, and water goes everywhere. So it's making something like this waterproof for high power situations really difficult.
I was thinking about that, and the thing that I hadn't thought about before is the potential of using something like I have a hot water boiler in my house. It's like a Zurichi or Zarushi or whatever that keeps a bunch of water hot for tea and stuff like that. And it's got a magnetic one, and I realized it doesn't have anything going into it. You could theoretically have a point on a case that is completely hardened, that is there, that is magnetic, and you can just snap it on to the outside and have it deliver power to the inside. The inside's on battery and stuff like that. That'd be an interesting way to approach that, to make sure that it's totally unified. You're not it's not a seal. It's like it's part of the case. Interesting. Next question.
Roscoe Jones, Madison, Indiana, back again with, have you ever avoided using orange plugs at a venue? Do you prefer them over generator power?
I go ahead, Bill.
So when I was building out my studio, I asked specifically for two circuits, and I wanted clean power and dirty power. And clean power, everything audio was going to go on there. So in things like hospitals, you often see two different colors, and that just means that one of them is kind of filtered power with low noise, and the other one is general AC power. So if I'm not using audio equipment, I do stay away from the orange things, thinking that there's some sort of important equipment on that circuit, and they've distinguished the two sides of the AC outlet in order to keep noise creating stuff out of there and make sure that the stuff plugged into the clean power circuit works appropriately. It's just been a habit of mine forever. So yes, I avoid using them wherever I see them, unless I'm sure that I have something that's not going to inject noise or problems into the AC system.
Go, John.
Yeah, typically in the venues I've worked in, the orange plugs are the isolated ground, and so there's some extra separation from the rest of the system. If I'm going to use those, I'm just going to make sure that everything I put on it is clean and not going to add any additional noise.
Yeah, I think in most venues, I'm told not to use those. so those aren't for you, So that's usually how we approach it. I don't think I've ever been in a facility where they said that was okay to use the orange plugs. So those are, as I said, they're isolated grounds. They're for them, and they generally don't. They're jealous of that pipeline. Next question.
Yeah, you don't want noise going into the heart monitor circuits. That would be bad. CJ, Downington, Pennsylvania. Do power conditioners like a Furman genuinely protect equipment by sacrificing themselves during a lightning strike, or is this capability exaggerated by manufacturers?
Good, John.
They do what they can, but a large enough strike if it can arc across, it can still provide damage. The joule rating is something to really pay attention to. A direct lightning strike is going to be difficult for anything to maintain, but having equipment that wants to die first is definitely best practice to make sure that you're doing the most you can for equipment. Sometimes in the event of a really strong storm, things I care about in my house, I'm going to just remove from the wall. I just don't even have to worry about that becoming a problem.
Yeah, I've definitely, I try to minimize the number of things. Now, I know that I'm not following all the rules of power, but I try to minimize the number of things that go into the wall. So I do spread it out to a couple different locations, but I do have, I know where the circuits are in my room. I have 2 circuits in my room, so I know which ones are going to where. But I also have those UPSs are pretty much managing almost everything in that's going, not necessarily these little background lights, but everything else are being managed by the UPSs. And so there's 3 places to pull things out of the wall if we get a lightning storm. We don't have very many here in Northern California, but if you do, I can very quickly get things unplugged. All the important things can be unplugged in less than a minute. And what I'm doing oftentimes is I will look at a storm. And I count. So you grew up in a country, and if you grew up in the country, you generally know that it's a little bit conservative, but you generally calculate 7 seconds a mile. So you just go, if I count to 14, that storm is 2 miles away. I'm not that worried about that. If I get anything less than about 14, I'm starting to like unplug things. Like that may come, especially. And you'll see most people that I grew up with. If you see lightning, you'll see them just start counting in their mouth. It's going 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're trying to figure out how far away that is, because for a lot of us, we were on a tractor, and we were like, the tractor is a great place for lightning to strike, and so we were like, how long will it take us to get the tractor back into the building? And so we were making decisions about safety, and so as a result, though, is that I do pay attention if I see lightning. And when I leave for a long period of time, if I'm going to leave for a week, I usually unplug most of my critical gear just in case something happens when I'm gone. And so those are the things that I keep certain things in, because all my security and everything else stays in, and all my cameras and all that stuff. But outside of that, my electronics, like my computers and stuff, I pull out of the wall if I'm going to be gone for more than a couple days. But anyway, yeah. So I think that you do enough voltage is going to be a problem. And we won't get into this too much, but lightning rods are actually particularly useful. Like, they're not put up there for decoration. They actually are pretty good at moving the voltage from the top of where your house is to the ground. Next question.
Robert Sababity in Poland. How do you manage different socket and plug standards, as well as 120 volt versus 240 volt sources when traveling to different countries?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Always travel with a switching power supply that accepts 100 to 240 volts, 50 or 60 hertz, and that should protect you from blowing up your power supply. Then the problem is connecting it to the power source, and you can get these plug adapters. You can buy them in almost any country, Best Buy or any electronics store. They will sell international plug adapters, but make sure that your power supply, or the piece of equipment that you're plugging in, if it has a power supply in it, is versatile for multiple voltages and frequencies. Things like a hairdryer or something don't have any switching power supplies in them, so they will either blow up or work very poorly, depending on which voltage you plug them into. And most transformer type converters that you can buy to convert voltage between 110 to 240 can't take something that is as high a wattage as like a hairdryer or a toaster or a heater. So make sure that you have appropriately powered equipment for the country that you're visiting. And I would not try and use anything that is resistive heating in it in a foreign country unless I bought it in that foreign country for that voltage.
You go, CJ?
I used a clothing steamer that I bought in the U.S. and Belgium. I plugged it in, and it worked really, really well, really, really fast once.
Exactly. And then it started to smell. I've had a couple situations where we've not thought through it. Like most electronics, I assume, are going to be 110 to 240. So we do look at it. I will put on the power supply, I often put red tape on it if it's a 110 only. I mean, usually we're buying things here, so that I really am clear, like, hey, this doesn't go there, but I look at all of them as especially when we're getting ready to travel, I look at all my power warts and I look at all the things, and I really try to make sure that I know, and we tend to take things out. And then even things that aren't marked, like we used to have a switcher, we had this Panasonic 4500 or whatever that was, $25,000 switcher. And it really looked like the power supply was 110 to 240. And I was like, I'm pretty sure it is. But on the manual, it says it's 110. And you're like, what do I do? And I call Panasonic. They're like, we think it's 240. So the first day, I really needed to use it. And the first day, I read it, and there were people on the internet that said it was fine. I plugged it in, it was fine. But it was like, they didn't even list it as that way. And I was like, and I think that they did that just so you'd buy new ones for Europe, or they'd separate those out. But anyway, almost all electronics will handle the whole length, because it's just too expensive to manufacture two different power systems. And so generally they make them so they can handle both. As far as plugs go, and I was trying to find them, I can't find them. I used to buy these on Amazon. We had a heavy use of what are called VTC power strips, or VTC power strips. And these VTCs basically have, or maybe it's VCT. Anyway, that's maybe why. Hold on. VCT, I think. VCT power strips. And so there's a couple things that these have. So they have outlets, and what you can do, I'll show you what they look like here. I don't know. They don't seem to really pay attention. Like they don't seem to care about about Amazon. But I don't know who buys them. But anyway, so these ones here, and what you'll see in the kind of stretched videos here, you can see how they have an outlet that has lots of different. So that outlet, that combination will handle not everything, but almost everything when it comes to what you might be plugging in. Now, this one has obviously a power supply for the UK, and you can buy ones that have different power supplies. But they make one of these, and I'm going to see if I can find it quick enough. And I have lots and lots of these. I mean, I got to a point where this is all I bought were these VCTs because I was like, I don't want to figure this out. I just want it to work. Now, the one that I'm looking for that I can't find immediately, I'll let someone else answer the question, is they make these VCTs with C13 inputs. So VCT makes these with a C13 input. And what that means is you have that standard, what you would put in the back of your most computers, and most of your production equipment is the power cord for the VCT international cord. And so I started buying those. And what's great about those is that you can find a C13 cable to whatever the country is in any hardware store. I mean, literally, I was driving to Davos from in Switzerland, and we pulled into some small little town, and we got some little sandwiches. They were very good. But we also walked over to like the local little hardware store, and they had a whole section of C13 cables. And so we just grabbed those. I'll just grab 5 of these, and then that powers my entire system in that country. And it's a really inexpensive way to solve that. I do tape them to the thing because I'm always worried they're going to get pulled out. But I do, gaff them to the connector. But it works really well. Go ahead, Chris. Can't hear you, Chris.
I yield.
Okay, there you go.
I yield my time. I can't remember what I was going to say. I got wrapped up in your C13 thing. Power 241. I apologize. Getting old.
Yep.
Bye.
Go ahead, CJ.
The other thing I was going to say is I get something like this. This is one from Anchor that it has some USB ports in it, and it can take 110 to 240. So then I only need one international adapter, and I have 2 plugs. So I can be traveling with a surge protector that'll take the voltage and power my equipment. The other thing is, when in doubt, because so many things get powered off a USB-C, if you're without a hub and you don't want to plug your wall warts for phones and things like that, charge it out of the computer. Use the computer as the charger, because if you're regulating voltage to the computer handles the rest.
The other thing to remember there, by the way, is that when you talk about computers, is that if you buy a little converter, you get one of those little travel boxes. One of the most common things they do is get rid of the ground. It's just a plastic ground that goes in, so it just takes it. And so just remember, when you use that to plug, number one is you don't have a ground anymore. But most importantly, if you're using a laptop, when your hand is sitting on your laptop, you are the ground. Like, so you'll feel it if you put your hand in there. You move it across the top of your computer, and you'll feel this, like it feels like it's really smooth, like it's like you're floating over top of electricity,
moving, yeah.
Because it's electricity that's moving. It's little voltage.
I can't believe that doesn't break the computer.
It doesn't break the computer, but what it does do is, if you spend a lot of time in Africa, one of your computers will turn brown on where your hand sits, and you realize, oh, it's burning my skin into the surface of the computer. So it's so you just know that you are the ground if there's no ground.
I remember being terrified on a train, because it was like I'm plugged into the train power, but my laptop feels like it's on fire.
It just so that's But so just know that anytime you don't have a ground, you may be the ground. Go ahead, Bill.
You'll remember that, because the first time you plug a 110 device into a 220 outlet, the wispy white gas of life escapes from the plug. It's a bad thing, usually with a popping sound.
Yeah, exactly. I did them in a hotel room. We were just doing our comms, just little radios, not real comms. They were like radios before I understood what comms were. And they were like the little Motorola little radios that you buy. And I thought, oh, that'll be good for comms. And they're not. Anyway, so, we're plugging them in the UK, and you're like watching TV. No, they didn't go. The funny thing is, it didn't happen quickly. It was like over a couple minutes, you're like, I smell something. And then suddenly you look over and something's like melting down and everything else. And you're like, maybe I'm not going to be able to use those. Good. Next question.
Michael Graves in Houston, Texas, up next. Do you ever deploy instrumentation to be able to meter your electrical draw?
Good, Courtney.
Yeah, I talked about that earlier. The kilowatt thing, you can get them at Harbor Freight somewhere in the U.S. There's an international one. I think that may handle 240 or 110, the P3 international kilowatt. You can also get, now, if you're talking about lighting equipment, where you want to see how much load you've got on a leg of, you're doing your own power distribution, then you've got to get something that like a clamp-on ammeter that goes like this. You clamp it over one leg of your AC, and it will tell you how much current is flowing through that leg. So it's non-contact. It's fairly safe. You don't have to actually attach it to the power itself. It just reads it inductively. So you can find those power meters around. And they also make a clamp on, permanent installation ones that you can put inside a wall or something around one leg of the AC power and bring it out to a meter so that you can constantly monitor the amount of power that's going through that wire.
Go, John.
Yeah. What I do for my deployments is with the PDU management, I use software. It's called DSIM. It's a data center infrastructure management tool. And what you're able to do is send the information from your UPSs, from your PDUs into this and represent it. It can also be used across multiple different physical locations. So if you have smart PDUs that plug in and can have internet connection, they can report up to the cloud and pull in that information so you can see what the status is on a job site, what the power looks like, how much draw there is, and just validate everything.
Yeah, and what we got into, I don't have a picture of it, but in our power or in our production trailer, we had Pixel Core had a 24-foot production trailer. We moved from asking for power to just putting a power distribution hub. I mean, like you can spend $5,000 and you put one in, and it would take up to 100 amp 3-phase, and you just plug it in, and then we distributed power to everybody else. Like we were just like, and then we had meters, and we had a ton of control, and we had a ton of understanding what those things are. It's a bigger investment, but it was kind of life changing. Now you go to shore power, you've got the leads, and you run the leads right into the system, and then you have a lot more control over what's happening. Now, next question.
Callum McCorkle, Bournemouth and Leeds. I think we might have had this one earlier and moved it. Question for the power panel experts. I've heard that different wiring to get better sound and video. What is an isolated ground mesh network, and how do you build it to have perfectly clean signals?
Yeah, I think we did talk to this one before. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, so it's basically what you want to do is keep electrical impulses off of anything that's going to deal with sound or that needs a clean signal to operate quickly. Traditionally, you do that on any circuit. You want to isolate any circuit that has motors or maybe fluorescent light ballasts. Those are two things. The badly wired ones of those create a lot of noise, and it goes back up and down the electrical signal. And you want to keep that away from your signal line. So it's really good to have something with a ground that you trust, and then something else to power the stuff where it doesn't matter.
Good. Courtney?
Yeah, we talked about the grounding and power source. Another thing to watch out for as far as keeping clean signals is induction, which is not necessarily the power you're powering into, but if you're running long cables, hum can get into that to low signal level cables like audio microphone cables. And so a thing to address that would be something like this Canary star quad. And it uses two conductors for each single conductor in a normal balanced cable. And they're twisted together. And so they form a cancellation path for any inductive hum that's going to get into that cable. And they're considerably better, and they have a full coverage shield as well. They're considerably better at eliminating inductive hum off of a long microphone cable run. So look for the Canary star quads.
Next question.
Guy Cochran in Seattle, Washington. If buying a battery backup system today for a work-from-home studio that cannot go down, would you go with an expensive traditional rack-based APC Cyber Power or with an Ecoflow Jackery-style portable power system?
Go ahead, John.
I would go with the expensive traditional rack base, but I think it's purpose built, right? So if I needed something that needed to be portable and I needed to take the work from home studio could be from anywhere, the Jackery is probably the one I would go with. If I'm going to a room in my house or something that's permanent, I'm going to go ahead and leave that in place because I don't want to fiddle with unplugging everything that's supposed to be permanent and then taking this thing on the road. If there's no use case to bring it outside the house, I would use the rack.
Good, Guy.
Yeah, this is when the cloud's really cool. This evening I have a production where it's feeds are coming in from around the world. So the AWS obviously handles the power. So it's cool that we're not going to go down up there, but I'm controlling via Splashtop, one of the instances. And I guess worst case scenario of what I have in this room is, oops, wrong one. I have just a couple of these little guys, and I was looking at buying more of them because I have in the other room for the internet and for all my rack and server stuff, I have one of these. So I was thinking about buying another one of these versus, one of these Ecoflows, not that big of one, but something in this range because I've been wanting to get one of these anyway. So hence the question, just buy a bunch of these or.
Well, I wouldn't get those. Don't get those. Don't get any more of those.
Those ones are horrible. I've watched them just go down and then I'm out in 4 minutes.
But the APC 1500 is halfway between what you're talking about. You have a big rack, and then you have that little one. And the APC, they make the one that sits on your floor, and it's got a battery that you can pull out, and it's got all the controls on the front, and it's halfway between. And that's what I used to own 80 of those. That's what we put into our kits, and they worked. We had some of them. We had to put big things on them because we took the beepers out, so that because we would put a light somewhere. We didn't want it to beep during a show behind the stage, so we take them out. So we surgically remove the PZOs to make them quiet. But they have been workhorses, and so when halfway between the rack and I wouldn't use the little. I won't use one that I can't remove a battery. Like I will not. If I can't remove, that's the minimum requirement, is that I have to be able to have a removable battery because it's a different level, and then I have to be able to see on the front what's going on. So I would highly recommend those in-betweens for your non-rack stuff. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Jason White in New Orleans, Louisiana. Does anyone use a DC power distribution center in their rack to get rid of all the wall warts that take up so much space in flight cases? And he says something like this, and he has a link to a B&H product.
Go ahead, Courtney.
I haven't looked at the link, but I certainly do. I have a 12-volt, 10-amp power supply that'll provide all the 12 volts to all the little modules. I got so many little converter boxes and stuff that take 9 to 15 volts. And so then I'll go out of my 12-volt, 10-amp supply to all of those individuals with and you can find these little distribution cables that are designed for security cameras. So look in that in any security camera store that'll do power distribution. So they'll have 5 of those coaxial DC connectors to 1 female to 5 male, and those are handy to have to distribute to all of the outputs with just a single cable coming off my 10-watt 12-volt supply. I also have these little DC to DC buck converters that I buy on the internet for anything that requires 5 volts or 9 volts to go. That'll down convert. They're adjustable, so I'll plug them into the 12-volt and dial them down to 9 volt if it's something that requires 9-volt DC.
Go ahead, John.
I've used these before in the past as well. This one looks a little expensive. One thing I found accidentally, just because I'm a guitar player, is the guitar pedals and the distributions of those can do usually 9 to 12 and sometimes have 24-volt outputs. And they're significantly cheaper than this option that you have here. So looking into some of those options as well. Those have been really successful for me, is saving all the wall warts. No one wants to deal with that in the back of a rack.
Next question.
Henry Ramos, Yonkers, New York. Do power strips have a shelf life? How often do you replace them? And do you replace power conditioners as well, like the Furmans?
The power conditioners definitely have a shelf life. So they are going to reduce over time, especially overuse. The power strips themselves, I don't know, I've had them for 20 years. I've never seen anything particularly change unless it's been put under pressure or water. Next question.
Walt Palmer in Lewis, Delaware says during the second Reagan inauguration, extreme cold temperatures caused the event to move from the mall to a local pro sports venue. ABC News had to bring in vendor TV trucks and rental gensets. During the transit, the diesel gelled on the tractor and the genie. That's pretty cold.
I have a lot of respect for people who do events in really, really harsh environments because I won't. I'm like, there's a lot of things I can work on, and that's not the one I want to work on. So
gasoline is solidifying.
Yeah, when it's getting that cold, I'm kind of like, hey, let's move inside. Like, it's just that I'll tell people early on, like, hey, the weather forecast says it's going to be below negative 10 degrees. Let's do this inside. And there's a whole bunch of reasons to do that, like, including people's health, and everyone gets sick, and there's a lot of other things. Yeah, go ahead, Guy, real quick.
Yeah, doing this event in Austin a couple weeks ago, I mean, Keith Lee, seeing a guy like that operate, it's just amazing. He just comes rolling up. It's just like, we're not messing around. He just drops this big generator right next to Video Village, and it's just like, well, a little bit ways. It wasn't even that loud compared to what I thought it was going to be. But to see a guy like that, and then having a meal with him and his son shared some of the horror stories of because they do tennis events all over the country, and how they'd get like 120 amp circuit, and they're just like, no more. We just come in, boom, with our own power, drop it down, and we're off to the races. And that thing works like a champ, of course, because you could never trust the venue. Yeah, we got plenty of power. Then whoosh, boosh, boosh, boosh. It's cascading failure.
Yeah. Next question.
Robert Shoji, Los Angeles. Before you plug your equipment into a standard outlet at a venue, what are the 2 or 3 things you check first?
Go ahead, Courtney.
I check the polarity of I use one of these little plug-in detectors to let you know that the hot and neutral are not reversed and the ground is good. So that's the first thing I check, and then I check the voltage if I'm a little bit paranoid. Usually the little plug-in thing will suffice, and I keep them in all my kits.
I would love to say I check everything, but mostly if I'm working with a vendor that's doing that, I'm assuming that they're going to give me what I need. But I do plug the least important things in first. So I plug a couple things in. I don't plug the racks in immediately until I see how it works. But that I would say that I'd love to say we do more, but usually we're going into facilities that do this every day, and they have to work, so we don't worry about it as much. Next question.
Robert Sababity in Poland says, how do you practically minimize the risk of somebody plugging in a kettle, and he's using that as an example of a high power drawing piece of equipment, into your clean or backup power circuit?
Go ahead, John.
Make sure you make it easy to plug in things off that circuit. So if the easiest thing to do is the wrong thing, people will do it every time.
Yeah, one of the things that we do is we put out a big thing that we do is put on specific circuits, we put lots of charging units. So people can charge their phones, people can charge their other things like that. By the way, it's great networking. Put charging units on the back of your thing where people are walking by, and you get to meet everybody because everyone wants to plug in their phone. So so you have these charging units where we want them, and we put out, to his point, outlets that are exposed so that people can plug into the wrong things. And if those blow, it doesn't matter. And then we are pretty jealous about where our plugs go. And then we have a lot of headroom. Next question.
Next one comes from James Fosseline in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Can you use an EMF microphone to help diagnose issues you might have in your power equipment?
I've never done that.
Neither have I. I just looked it up. It's really interesting.
Microphone. It's
Modular
funny.
Synth Lab. Electromagnetic field microphone. It changes pitch, I guess. Depending on.
I have a part I have a corner over here that if I put my Heil microphone in just the right position, it will buzz. It's not plugged in anything. All I have to do is move the mic, and it doesn't do it. So I move my desk away from there. I was like, if the Heil microphone's buzzing, I do not want to sit in that space. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, a lot of power testers will have an EMF detector. It's just a power detector. You just get it near, it's non-contact. You just get it near a wire or a power receptacle, and it'll light up a little LED to let you know there's power flowing through that receptacle or through that wire. But that's what I would call it.
This looks kind of funky.
Microphone,
This is the 3.5 millimeter on top of a little suction cup.
It's a telephone tap.
Yeah, that looks like a kid thing.
Super
it's
interesting.
a telephone tap for the old carbon headsets.
Yeah, interesting. Next question.
CJ Cavell in Downington, Pennsylvania here on the panel. Do surge protectors and the UPS devices with Ethernet pass-through ports offer continuous signal conditioning, or is their protection limited to emergency situations like power surges and lightning strikes?
Go ahead, John.
It provides continuous protection. I wouldn't recommend any sort of important equipment going to the other side of that pass-through port. My guess is it's just a dumb switch, and I would definitely not recommend it going through that. They're not putting the money there. I used to see with old power protection, they would have the coax as well as like the RJ11 there to protect against line hits. If you're protecting the devices on the other side of it, I think it's very, very much less important.
Yeah, and there are different types of systems that will pass through until you lose it, and then I believe that you're looking for online double conversion, which is basically you're powering the battery, and then the battery is powering everything else. And that's not in the smaller UPSs. Like, so when we have larger Lieberts that we put into systems, those are going to have that double conversion. So what it's doing is the power coming in is powering the battery is empowering everything else. The other thing is the lifespan on those are lower because you're constantly running the battery. So that's the other thing to take into account. But it is for the really high end stuff that we do, we want to do that to make sure that it's not actually touching the outside world. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, are there any UPSs with voltage conversion capability?
No, they have to sit. You do the voltage conversion before that. I mean, everything's 110 to 220, so you put it in. But most UPSs are 110 or 220. Like, they are not one or the other. That's a pretty complex thing. But what we typically do is if we want to convert it, we put it ahead of it. But there's nothing that I know of that will plug into the UPS and it lets you choose the voltages. I've never seen that. It may exist, but I've never seen it. Next question.
Robert Soji, Los Angeles, is back. When plugging an extension cable into a standard wall outlet of a venue, is there a practical way to prevent the extension cable from coming loose from the outlet?
Gaff tape. So much gaff tape. Like you tape everything down. You tape it to the wall. You tape it when you take it out of the wall and you tape it right at the bottom, and you tape it in multiple places, and you do it horizontally. And then put then go long, and it would take a lot to trip it, but do it pretty early on. But we try to gaff tape, and then Velcro covers that we use for like carpeted areas and where you don't want to use gaff tape, and then obviously just a variety of other things like that. But you do want to pay attention to those things, and then a UPS. Go ahead, Courtney.
What I do in all my electrical cables, I use a shoestring as a tie wrap to tie them up when they're coiled up, and they wrap the shoestring around and tie it in a little bow. But when you put it in, the shoestring is always at the plug end of the cable. So you plug it in, and a lot of times there's a place you can wrap that shoestring around and tie it up about 5 inches down the cable. So if somebody trips over the cable, it'll just yank on the shoestring, which is attached to something else, and prevent it from being jerked out of the wall.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. Do you check a live lightning map before an event, and what protections do you employ if the risk is high?
I don't really check anything, but if we do check for weather, and I again, we're in Northern California, so we don't interact with lightning that often. But I will say that we look at the weather, and if it looks like lightning, and if it looks like it's coming, we just pay attention to it. Like, you can't stop everything because you think that there's going to be a forecast for lightning, because then it doesn't happen, and then you're just the kid who cried wolf. So you have to be kind of managed. But we do pay attention to, if we see lightning, we're paying a lot of attention to how far away that lightning is. Again, get it to a count under about 12, and we're worried. Especially if we see it coming towards us. Go ahead, Courtney.
If you're doing a golf match or something where lightning can be, a health issue to striking just people walking around, you need to, and you're running grounded equipment out there, I'd be very careful. And get people off of the field if there's a lightning storm coming through.
I think it was the Monday Night Football or Thursday Night Football. The Steeler game got stopped for like an hour because there was lightning too close, and they just they told everyone to get out of their seats and go into the area. Like, don't be in this area. The lightning was close enough to the stadium that they had to worry about. That's the first time I've ever seen that in a football game. You usually see lots of rain, but there was some kind of protocol that they had planned, and they kept on stopping the game to make that work.
You'll see it in golf tournaments all the time. They will clear for lightning. And don't stand under a tree.
That's the worst. Do not do that. I've seen a tree get hit. It's pretty cool. It rips it right in half. Next question.
Guy Cochran, Seattle. Hi, at a venue, how can you tell if you're on two separate circuit breakers?
Go ahead, John.
Become friends with the electrician. That's the most important thing you can do. There should be a power plan map where you can understand the circuits and the layouts and understand. But honestly, most of the venues that I'm working in, they have an electrician, or I have to bring one in, and then they can help you determine that and make sure you're not overloading any one circuit or any one leg, depending if it's a 3-phase or not.
And a lot of times we get lunch boxes that have different colored outlets, and we ask before we assume, but they might be red, blue, and green, and then we say, are these all different? Are these all different circuits? That tells you also to plug stuff in that you don't want to have a ground loop on. Don't do it across two of them. But it also tells you if you're doing primary and backup, to something that you have actually two circuits that are there. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, get the kilowatt meter that I said earlier and check the voltage, and then have somebody plug in that 1200 watt or 1500 watt heater in the next outlet over. And if the voltage drops on the outlet that you're monitoring, it's on the same.
Very good. All right. Great set of questions. I know I say this every time we get to the end of it. I was like, I don't know if anyone's going to ask any questions. And of course, we got lots and lots and lots of questions and lots of great answers. Thanks to the panel for all the great input here. We couldn't do this without you, and it was a lot of good information. Thanks to the producers for all the great questions. We can't do that without you either. This is a real short show. If you don't, this would have been a 15-minute show if you hadn't asked any questions. So we really appreciate all your input. And thanks to the incredible team on the back end that gets this done. It cuts this show 7 days a week. Thanks to John, who has our gear. That's making, there it is. There's the show behind John. And thanks to the incredible dev team, the folks that are managing this, the engineering teams, the management teams. There's a lot of people involved in every one of these shows, and we really appreciate everybody's work. We traveled. We're going to talk the Tlaloc reversal, which is the how many miles we would have had to walk if we went over to ask John, and then we went to Courtney, and then we went to somebody else. How many miles would we have had to travel? And that's the Tlaloc traversal, and we would have had to travel 91,000 miles, and that's 147,000 kilometers, and that's 727 million bananas for scale. All right, let's go ahead and jump into After Hours.
I remember what I was going to say about the 110, 240.
Yeah.
Joseph has been keeping tally of all the devices that he's blown up in Slovenia where he moved. He's like, lost another piece of gear.
We in Rwanda, we just have to. It's a slow. You just have to know how quickly you can. We had to stop using Macs. I know for me, couldn't stop. We had to stop using Apple products because we have to replace the power supply so often. You had to move to PCs so that we could open them up because it was too expensive to do that. It's hard. All right, out of here.
Have a good day, guys.
Take care. Good to see you, John.